The injury bug made its way back to Columbus and bit another Buckeye. Who is the injured player? How long will they be out? We'll discuss it today on Locked on Buckeyes.
You are Locked on Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked on Buckeyes for the Locked on Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, August 17th in the year 2022, and I want to thank you for making Locked on Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. On today's episode, we will get an early look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as the publisher of Irish Breakdown, Bryan Driskell, joins us for that. But before we get to talking about the first game of the season, another Buckeye got hit with the injury bug, and this one is significant as running back Evan Pryor is out for the season with a significant injury to his knee. In the offseason, well, let's go back to 2 years ago, not the offseason, this offseason, last offseason. Everybody thought, and I was a person that thought that there was a chance for Still Chambers to be possibly the third running back in the depth chart for the running backs last year. Well, he ended up going over to the offense, and Still Chambers is a player that is one of the top two linebackers on the Ohio State roster. This year, Marcus Crawley medically retired from football due to some issues with an injury that wasn't healing in the way and as swiftly as he thought it was going to. And with injuries, you never know. Sometimes medically retiring in college is the best thing for you in your future. Well, this one, I hope it's not as significant as Marcus Crawley's injury, but losing Evan Pryor for the entirety of the season is huge. We talked about maybe a month or so now, we talked about the possibility of Ohio State using not one, not two, but three running backs in 2022. Trevin Henderson, RB1, Mayan Williams, the backup, and then having some packages that would be sprinkled in during the first 3 or 4 games of the season for Evan Pryor to see how can he get on the field, how can he enhance his Buckeye offense, how can he enhance the running game, how can he be a threat out of the backfield. There are things, there are packages that are being worked for Evan Pryor prior to this injury. And I was kind of getting more excited about the Buckeyes using 3 running backs than the traditional 2 that they used last year, have used previously. You guys know I am a proponent and a pusher and a believer that using just 2 backs is good. You're just fine doing that, especially when they're as talented as the top 2 backs at Ohio State. But if you can add Evan Pryor, his electricity, his ability to do things that the other 2 guys can do, but not at the level that he does, I was thinking this was a good thing for him. Now, remember, 2 years ago, Still Chambers, no longer a running back. Will he be somebody to go to the offense this year with Evan Pryor out? No. No, this isn't an emergency. Even if it is an emergency, I think backup linebacker Chip Trainum, the Arizona State transfer who was a running back at Arizona State, I do think he would be someone that could play, that could practice on both sides, dual train, cross train, things of that nature, if they needed to put somebody else there. But I still don't think Still Chambers is that guy. I don't think Chip Trainum is that guy. I still think he's going to be a linebacker for Ohio State. I mean, the man has put on 20, 25 pounds in the offseason. That's going to change how you tote the rock if you go and play running back for Ohio State due to an emergency. Will it be Dallin Hayden? I think Dallin Hayden is literally the next man up with Evan Pryor out. So Dallin Hayden, true freshman, 4-star running back out of the state of Tennessee, he is someone that's going to step up in this role. And I have heard nothing, read nothing but good things about Dallin Hayden during training camp right now. Remember, he was not there during spring practice, so we did not get to see him during the spring game. But everything we have heard, the all-season workouts once he got to Columbus, everything we have heard and watched and seen from him and heard about from coaches and things like that in regards to Dallin Hayden and his play during training camp, he's doing very, very well for someone who just got on campus. You also have players that walk-on running backs, Caden Saunders, TC Caffey, Chase Breck. You have these guys that are possibilities of guys that can go here, play here, be someone that can move up the depth chart, even though they're walk-ons. That does not mean they're not really, really talented. That just means there was not a scholarship for them, and maybe they'll earn a scholarship down the road, but right now, they're walk-ons at this point in time. Injuries suck, man. I mean, we talked about the cornerbacks and the injury bug hitting them and how Legend Cavazos transferring, also Ryan Watts transferring, two guys that you would think would have been in the mix at corner this year to compete for the backup roles there. Those two guys are gone. You have a couple guys that are injured, a couple guys that are banged up. Burke banged up, dinged up just a little bit. Cam Brown banged up, dinged up just a little bit. These things are kind of expected, a little bruise, a little banging, a little ding on you every now and then during practice. But hopefully it doesn't linger into the season. Cam Brown already missed, I believe, the 2020 season due to an injury. It was either an Achilles or an ACL, one of the two during the Penn State game, knocked it off for the entirety of the season. Don't want to see Cam Brown out again during this upcoming season. Don't think that's going to happen. It's unfortunate, man. I mean, Evan Pryor, people were hyping him up. People that cover Ohio State, that have been there at practice, that have been there during press conferences, all I have heard have been great things about Evan Pryor and the possibility of what he could be in this Buckeye offense. The only good thing that I can say is out of an injury is that his career is not over. Yeah, remember, talk about Marcus Crawley medically retiring due to the injury. As of right now, that announcement from Evan Pryor has not been made about a medical retirement. So his career is not over. He's still going to wear the scarlet and gray. He is still going to represent Ohio State in the way that you want to. I've heard that he is one of those young men that does things the right way. Injuries suck. It's unfortunate. It's the only thing I can really say right now. But outside of that, hey, his future as a Buckeye, just wait to see what he does next year once he gets on the field because, baby, oh, baby, things can be scary when Evan Pryor is at full strength and he's playing under the lights at Ohio Stadium. This is the 100th year of the stadium. Would have been nice to see him tote the rock a few times during the celebration of the stadium this year. I teased it. It's finally about to arrive. An early look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Bryan Driskell, the publisher of IrishBreakdown.com, will join us next to do just that. This is Locked on Buckeyes. Buckle up, guys. This is going to be a fun look at the Buckeyes' first opponent during the college football season. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. No, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that can happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You kill someone. Those are atrocious. Those are bad. I don't want any of those to happen. Everyone knows about the risk of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, this still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. And joining us now here on Locked on Buckeyes, it is the publisher of Irish Breakdown. You might recognize the name Irish Breakdown. We have Ryan Roberts, who does the recruiting side for Irish Breakdown. It's the publisher of the website, though, irishbreakdown.com, Bryan Driskell. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk a little Notre Dame, Ohio State.
Yes, I have kind of teased this for a while, Bryan, getting a little early look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, as it is now a top 5 matchup going to start the season for both schools. I'm excited for this game, and I'm venture you're probably pretty excited yourself, Bryan, if I could say so myself. I would guess you are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, so this is certainly an opportunity to see the team that I cover and also grew up rooting for play against Ohio State. And you think about it, they're 4.5 hours apart. Two traditional long time programs. I think the two best programs in the North have been for a long time. I know Michigan fans won't like that. When you've only won 1.5 national titles since the end of World War II, you can't really talk to me about being a traditionally great program. So, but they haven't played much. And so obviously we don't get to see this very often. So it's a great short, small rivalry that I'm excited to see how they go. And it's a great gauge for Notre Dame to kind of see where you are as a program.
You mentioned they don't play much. I would love to see these two teams play more. Now, I understand why they do not, just for just playoff implications and them being the powers that they are. But that aside, I would love to see these two schools, even if they're not in the same conference. I don't see Notre Dame joining the Big Ten anytime soon, assuming that I believe I saw one of your tweets about the NBC deal. NBC Notre Dame deal is coming up. It's going to be signed here very, very soon or shortly. I don't see Notre Dame joining the Big Ten, but I would love to see these two schools battle it out more than they have. It's not only great for the sport, but it's great for both schools to gauge how good they are against against another great team in college football.
I'm not a proponent of necessarily the deal, and this isn't what you're saying. We've talked about this on our show. I'm not a proponent of playing Ohio State all the time.
Right.
I'm just like I could not care less about ever playing Michigan again. I'd like to see Notre Dame play Michigan State, Purdue more often, which to me are more long-term rivals. But I do think that there's a lot of merit to the discussion of Notre Dame and Ohio State should play like 2 to 3 times every decade.
Yes,
a home and home
exactly.
and maybe a neutral site field. Like they both like recruiting Texas. So play a game in Arlington once a decade, something like that. Play a game in the Superdome. It's good for recruiting for both sides and things along those lines. Where it's enough where you're playing enough to where you kind of keep that rivalry, kind of going, but it's not too much where it becomes like, oh, okay, and you got another game against Ohio State this year, So I that's kind of where I would like to see it fit in there.
That's doable. That's not, to me, what you just described and put together. It's not unrealistic. Now, you may say the ADs might not want to go that route, maybe, but when they think about how much money they're going to get, and with the ratings and the networks that are fighting for that game, it makes sense for everybody involved.
I mean, if it was ever going to happen, is it now kind of the window where something like that may happen? You've got, Notre Dame obviously is the report is that Notre Dame is going to re-up with NBC for a much bigger deal. Plus they're going to continue to be a part of the ACC, which gives them over $10 million a year as part of that TV contract as well. So, and obviously the Big Ten is getting ready to have their, what is it? The primetime game is going to be on NBC. Is that what the new deal is?
Yeah.
So there's obviously some carryover there. There's some, hey, Notre Dame, why don't you try scheduling some more Big Ten teams, since we're both all part of the same network. Notre Dame's athletic director is a Notre Dame graduate. Kevin Warren has had connections to the University of Notre Dame, who's the Big Ten commissioner. So, I mean, if there was ever going to be an environment in which a deal like that could be struck, I think this would be the one. Obviously, you've got the home and home now, so there's not necessarily need to schedule it for 3 years out. Notre Dame's got Texas A&M coming up. They've got Alabama coming up. They've got Florida coming up. But, you get those two. Maybe you can fit a neutral site game in there somewhere. And then maybe for the 2030s, you start saying, hey, look, this is the deal. We're going to make sure that we sign a contract saying at least 3 times in every 10-year period, starting in whatever, that we're going to have this deal. I think it would make a lot of sense. And maybe it's not like back-to-back. Maybe it's Notre Dame at home in 2032 and then Ohio State at home in 2034 and then the neutral site game in 2037, and you spread it out that way. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
I love Irish Breakdown from Ryan Roberts himself. I love it even more now for you, Brian, and what you just broke down that way so eloquently, almost like you have thought about this for quite a while.
A little bit.
Just like fans have thought about this game coming up September 3rd, prime time on ABC for quite a while. I'm excited that it is in prime time. I think if it was on Fox at 12 noon, it would be big. But I think that prime time slot makes it that much bigger. It's Labor Day weekend. People are ready to have fun, not go to work on Monday. And I'm excited to watch ball, man. Notre Dame was 11-2 last year, finished at number 8 in the AP poll. They have a new coach who has ties to Ohio State and Marcus Freeman, who also brought in a guy who was his former teammate at Ohio State and James Laurinaitis, who is now in South Bend as well. So I'm excited for this game, but I think it all starts, look at the head coach, how Marcus Freeman has handled himself, how he's carrying himself, how he's done in the recruiting. I think it all starts there. And from what I've seen, Brian, so far, Marcus Freeman has done a phenomenal job during his early tenure as the head coach for Notre Dame.
The biggest thing for Notre Dame, and I know at times Ohio State fans haven't liked the manner in which he's gone about it, but it is what it is. He's not trying to appeal to Ohio State fans. He's trying to appeal to Notre Dame fans. That's the school he's the head coach for. I think the reason he has been so widely accepted by Notre Dame fans is one thing Coach Freeman did the minute he was hired as defensive coordinator, and then it's only been ramped up since he was the head coach, is he's really embraced the tradition of Notre Dame. He's done things like, this may not seem like a big deal, but Notre Dame has a player walk before every game. There's like this line, and the fans are on both sides, and the players all walk through it into Notre Dame Stadium. Well, Brian Kelly took it from the Basilica, which is the church on campus where Notre Dame used to do a pregame mass, and he moved it to the Goog, which is the football facilities. Well, Marcus Freeman has moved it back to the Basilica. That may not seem like it's a big deal, but for Notre Dame fans, for the tradition of Notre Dame, for former players, it's just another example of this is a guy that gets it. He's embraced Lou Holtz in a way that Brian Kelly never did. He's embraced the tradition in a way that Brian Kelly never did. And I think Notre Dame fans love him for that because, Brian Kelly brought success, but it was always like, Brian Kelly lifted up Notre Dame as a stumbling block to his success, as opposed to embracing how Notre Dame can be used to create something special. And that's what Coach Freeman has done. And, I think Notre Dame fans have loved it. And of course, results speak for themselves so far in recruiting. Now he's got to go out and show that he can get those similar results when it comes to winning on Saturdays.
We are here with Bryan Driskell. He is the publisher of IrishBreakdown.com. This is Locked On Buckeyes. Brian and I are going through a quick little early look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, talk about the TV contracts and how great it would be to have a home and then a neutral site game every decade for these two programs. Marcus Freeman has done a phenomenal job, not just with the tradition that he's already had, but I also have noticed that there's a belief of these players. And I think the biggest thing with a new coach, do the players buy into, do they believe what the coach is preaching every single day? And Brian, I'm on the outside looking in, not in the trenches like you, and don't cover the team like you do. But from what I have seen, it seems like these players, from the starters to those that are not going to get on the field, they all are buying into Marcus Freeman. And Brian, that's a good sign for this team going into 2022.
I mean, that's so key, right? And that's been one of the things that's been missing from Notre Dame for years. There hasn't been that same buy-in. There hasn't been that belief that, hey, this coach is in it with us. This coach has our back. This coach truly believes in us. I mean, even little things like, players have talked about how they'll come into the Goog, that's like I said, the football facility, and they'll see Freeman and the other coaches in the gym working out when the players are showing up. During the offseason, Brian Kelly would literally leave once they got back from winter break, and he'd be gone till spring ball, and then he'd be gone all summer. Freeman's not leaving. Like, he went on like a week vacation because he's got 6 kids, took his family on a week vacation, and it was just like, it's the only time he's been gone. It's that's where that buy-in comes from, because when I look around, I see coach. When we're in the gym working out, I see coach. When we're doing this, I see coach. The players are always over his house. He encourages players encourages coaches, bring your kids around. You're always seeing Coach Freeman's kids running around. And the thing he said is, I want them to not just see me as their coach and all these, but I want them to see me as a father, as a husband, because it's more than just that. And I think the players really love and respect that. He was that way as a defensive coordinator, and he's been that way as a head coach. And I think that's where that buy-in comes from. And you've seen it. I mean, Notre Dame had a lot of guys turn down potential high day 1, day 2 NFL draft slots. Isaiah Foskey was projected as a late first-round pick, early second-round pick. He decided to come back, for his senior year, and he talked about, I want to play for Coach Freeman, and I believe we can win a national championship. Jason Adamiola did it. Jarrett Patterson would have been the number 2 center in the draft behind Tyler Linderbaum if he would have come out last year. He decided to come back. He wants to play for Coach Freeman and Harry Hiestand, obviously. And they say, we want to win a national championship. Will they win it? We don't know, but he has instilled a genuine belief that we can be this type of program. And I think a big part of it is because they no longer feel like we're in it together as a group of players, but now we have coaches that have our back. And that honestly has not always been the case at Notre Dame under Brian Kelly.
You mentioned that the players respect him, and he's kind of earned and done things that will gravitate young people, these young 18 to 22-year-old athletes, to him, and they have a respect for him right now already as the head coach at Notre Dame. I recently saw they named Tyler Buckner the starting quarterback for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Does he have the respect of the players right now going into the season?
Oh, there's no question. And look, the players look around. They see Tyler Buckner. I've talked to defensive players, other sources connects with the defensive team, and they're like, we hate going against that guy. And we hate playing against Tyler Buckner because of the type of player he is. They know he's a dynamic player. The interesting dynamic is you can't talk about Tyler Buckner with also not talking about Drew Pine, who's the guy that he beat out.
Yeah.
Tyler's a little bit more of a reserved kid. He's just kind of goes out there and plays and makes plays. He's not a real outgoing vocal kid. Drew Pine is. And the players actually respect both of them. And Drew Pine has really embraced the backup. He battled for the starting job, but he understands. He knows how good Tyler is. And so Drew is more of the vocal, kind of charismatic type of kid the players respond to and listen to. And then obviously Tyler's the playmaker. So I think there's the two of them together kind of give that vibe of, hey, we've got this, right? And then as Tyler emerges, he can then become more vocal on natural terms as opposed to having to force it on the quarterback. So I think from a leadership standpoint, the quarterback position has that down, but that's not what's going to win you games, right? At the end of the day, it's can he make plays, and can he make plays in the big games? And that's the thing that Brian Kelly could never get at Notre Dame. He could never get the quarterback play to be there in the big games. He couldn't get his team ready to play in the big games. And as good as Notre Dame has been the last 5 years, 54-10, their record against teams that were ranked in the top 10 was like, I think 5-5, something like 6-6, something along those lines. Like, they beat up on a lot of unranked teams. And until the quarterback play on the field takes another jump forward, it's really not going to matter. And that's, I think, where a lot of the optimism comes for Tyler Buckner, because he is the most talented kid they've had. I think you probably have to go back to Deshaun Kaiser, Malik Zaire, those kind of guys, until you found a kid who just has his playmaking ability as a runner and a thrower.
Brian, what would you say are the biggest strengths of the defense, and then say one strength and then one weakness of the defense this year?
Well, the front, that's going to be the strength. Notre Dame's front four has been good for years. You go all the way back to the 2018 team. It's kind of really when it started. Notre Dame had 6 kids from that defensive line get drafted. Both of their starters and backup defensive ends from that rotation that played a lot were all drafted. Jerry Tiller was a first-round pick. And it's just continued. Now Isaiah Foskey's projected as a high pick. Jason Adamiola is one of the better defensive tackles in the country. So I think that's really where it starts. They're not a big defensive line. They're very athletic, great block destruction. The edge players are actually a little bigger than the interior guys, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow.
But that's partly because your big end is Riley Mills at 6'5", 292, and so, very, very talented group. And that's kind of been the foundation of the defense really for several years, has been the front four. And linebacker has been a strength in the past. It was down last year. There's a lot of expectation that it's going to be better this year, but that's still a bit of a show me situation. The talent's there, but your best player has like 22 career tackles. I got to see it first. Secondary is interesting, Jay, because you've got 2 of the best secondary players in the country in Brandon Joseph, who Ohio State fans will remember, intercepting Justin Fields in the end zone a couple years ago on a really good Northwestern. Well, that was a really good Northwestern secondary.
Yes, it was.
Greg Newsome,
really good.
Brandon Joseph was a consensus All-American. He's now transferred over to replace Kyle Hamilton. Cam Hart's considered one of the 10 best corners coming back in the country. Last year was his first year really playing corner. He converted from wide receiver, 6'2.5", 205. He runs a 4.4. Just a really dynamic player. But then there's the opposite on the other 2 positions, right? So there's a battle at the other safety position. There's the veterans who aren't super athletic. Then there's the young kids who don't necessarily know the position but are really athletic. And then, of course, the cornerback opposite Cam Hart's a big concern. And anyone that watched the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State knows, or Oklahoma State knows, that that's what Oklahoma State did. They just picked on the cornerback opposite Cam Hart. They said, number 5, we're going to ignore him the whole game. Let's go pick on these other guys, see if they can stop us. And in the second half, they couldn't. And that's really what the game came down to. And that's going to be the thing. If Notre Dame's going to have an elite defense this year, those 2 positions have to play better. Will they? We'll find out on September 3rd. It's certainly a good first game gauge, right, for whether or not your secondary is better this year. But that would be the concern that Notre Dame has going into the season.
Quickly, we're almost out of time. One strength, one weakness for the offense.
Well, it's trenches, right? And last year was such a disappointing year because the offensive line was so bad last year. And there was talent, but the technique was terrible. They weren't the same physical group you were used to seeing under Harry Hiestand in past years. And that was really what did the offense in. They had good skill on the perimeter. Notre Dame has a lot of speed on offense. I think this is the thing that is a misconception people have about Notre Dame. Chris Tyree is a 4.3 kid. Lorenzo Styles can absolutely fly. Braden Lindsey was a state track champ coming out of high school. Like, they can run. They just couldn't block anybody last year. And now you get Harry Hiestand back. He's kind of reconfigured the line. He's moved their right tackle inside to guard. They're going to be massive. They average about 316 pounds across the board. They're small guys, 308. So they're a really big group, and they don't have their biggest guy's 327. So there's like a 350 pounder that raises the average up, right? They're just all big. I think it's like 317, 310, 308, 317, and 327 across the board. So real big physical line. And of course, you get Harry Hiestand back. It's about instilling toughness. I mean, that's a similar move to what Ryan Day did, right? Like, you got to bring in a coach with a reputation to develop toughness in the run game and toughness in the trenches. That's what Justin Fry was hired to do, right? That's what UCLA was. That's what he was at Boston College. He also interviewed for the Notre Dame job when Harry Hiestand left the first time. I don't know if Ohio State fans know that. He was one of the finalists for the O-line job in 2017 when Notre Dame had to replace Hiestand the first time. And then Notre Dame's doing the same thing, bringing Harry Hiestand back. It's if Notre Dame is going to be good, right? I mean, Jay, you're a college football guy, right? You know this.
Yeah.
When Notre Dame is good, they dominate in the trenches.
Correct.
And that's where they've got to be. And I think that's what the strength is going to be. The concern is depth. They've had an injury at running back, just like, Ohio State I saw had one today, which is terrible.
Yeah.
They had a dynamic young running back, Jadarian Price, go down. They just lost their veteran receiver, Avery Davis, to the season for an ACL injury. And they already kind of thin to begin with. So there's talent there, but the margin for error at the skill positions is really thin. And that's another reason that Tyler Buchner is the guy, because the hope is that with his playmaking ability, he can kind of make everybody around him better. But that lack of depth and the lack of proven production on the perimeter, I think, is the biggest concern for Notre Dame going in. Because it's got to be good, right? Can you take the pressure off Michael Mayer? I mean, we know he's a stud tight end, but if that's all they got, defense is going to say, well, we got enough resources to take that guy out. We're going to make somebody else beat us. The question for Notre Dame is, can somebody else make you pay? And I think that's going to be the big thing, that if Notre Dame can answer that question positively, they're going to be really good on offense this year. If they can't, then they're going to be what they've been in the past. Beat the teams you're supposed to beat, but struggle against the teams that are on your level or slightly above.
Brian, this has been fun. I loved every second of it, from the early conversations to just you breaking down the offense and defense like you did. If you could let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and where they might be able to read some things that Irish break down in regards to this game and getting to know Notre Dame a little bit better before the top 5 matchup on September 3rd.
Lots of places you can find us. You can find me on Twitter at CoachD178 is where you can find us. D is in Driscoll. That's my last name. You can also find our website. I try to make it easy for you. www.irishbreakdown.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Irish Breakdown, on YouTube. We also can subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can just look up Irish Breakdown. So we try to get it as many platforms as possible. All of our content is free. All of our articles are free. We try to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. The only thing we charge for is our premium message board. So, if you want good content, we try to be fair, try to dive into the weeds, provide analysis, X's and O's, not do the hot take type of thing. So if you like real talk, we have some Ohio State fans that are in our chat every day and do a great job, enjoy it themselves. Some, not so much, but that's just how it is. So come join us at Irish Breakdown. Just type that in on basically any format and you'll find us there.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. You can send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. I talked about getting an early look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We just got it here with Bryan Driskell from Irish Breakdown. Did a phenomenal job. And Brian, I want to thank you for coming on Locked on Buckeyes. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.